This is Seth Williams from retipster.com. I have a good college friend of mine. We're meeting here at our alma mater, Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The reason I wanted to talk to Chris is because I'm currently in the process of trying to find people who are self-employed and get their take on what does it take to make that transition and go from working a job to go working and relying solely on your own income. And the reason I thought Chris would be highly qualified to talk about this is because, first of all, he is self-employed, and also he is a financial advisor. He actually does this for a living. And he has a lot of just knowledge and wisdom and insights in terms of what are the textbook correct ways to do this, if there is such a thing. Chris is a really smart guy. He obviously went to Calvin, so he's pretty brilliant right there. But he's also a Notre Dame MBA, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so he's seen a lot of the world. He deals with some really high-level clients. And so Chris, my first question for you was, as a self-employed person yourself, how many sources of income do you have right now?
Yeah, I'd say right now I have two sources of income. Okay. I have my business, my wealth management business, which is what I do for a living, meeting with individuals and helping them manage their money and come up with a plan for their retirement. And then I have my money that I've made from working prior to this and during this time, which I've invested. So I have my job and then I have my investment portfolio.
Okay. So just talking about your day-to-day income, like what you live off of, would you say, what percentage of that comes from your investments versus your active business activity?
Yeah, good question. I would say the majority of my income, probably roughly 75 to 80% comes from my business, from my day-to-day job, and then 25% I would say comes from my investment portfolio.
Okay, alrighty, cool. I know as somebody who was a W-2 employee for a good chunk of time before you decided to do your own thing, at what point did you feel comfortable taking that leap? How much, was there a certain dollar amount you needed to earn? Did you sort of figure out, okay, these are my monthly expenses, my income from my business has to exceed it by this much, or from my investments needs to exceed it by this much? Was there some kind of formula or rationale you use to say yes, I'm officially comfortable making this leap now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say for me, as I thought about this, I kind of thought about, what are my expenses? And I was someone who really always wanted to own their own business. It had kind of been something always in the back of my mind. And so because I always wanted to own my business, I had always lived very conservatively in terms of what I spent. I never bought an expensive house or an expensive condo. I didn't have a lot of expensive hobbies or something like that. And I found that if I can find a way to make, just $20,000 to $25,000 a year, I could be free of the corporate world. And so that was really kind of the first point that I looked for was, how could I make that much? The point where I started to feel more comfortable, I'd say was when I was making about $1,000 more than I was spending per month, right? So the first point was really kind of paying all my business expenses and then paying myself, $20,000 to $25,000 a year. And that was, kind of like the, point where I was very thankful and I thought, wow, this is working out. And then the next point became kind of when I was making about $1,000 a month more than that. And then I thought, okay, now I'm able to pay all my expenses and have a little bit left over. And then things have grown from there.
Yeah, okay. A lot of the people that read the RE Tipster blog or watch the YouTube channel or listen to the podcast, the situation that they're in is, they may run a real estate investing business, and, with real estate, depending on which, niche you're working in, has the tendency to have a very spiky kind of income where 1 month will be huge, like $50,000. The next month will be nothing or a few $1,000s. your source of income is it pretty steady? Like, is it a very predictable amount that comes in each month?
It is. It's very predictable. Okay. Yeah, so if I had to compare the type of business I run to a real estate business, I would say that it's more akin to like owning a rental property or owning a bunch of rental properties, right? My business has clients who pay me on a regular basis and I meet with them. Mm-hmm. So I have quarterly income coming in. So once a quarter I charge my clients, and then for that quarterly charge I meet with them and I help them with kind of all of their different financial issues. Mm-hmm. Whereas, in the type of business that, maybe people are looking at with RE Tipster, is a much more lumpy income. Mm-hmm. Mine is pretty stable. Mm-hmm. Now that being said, too, I also don't get like $50,000 checks one month. It's certainly not like that.
Yeah, I'm curious. Being a financial advisor, let's say you did get a big windfall of cash, like $50,000 or mm-hmm. $10,000 or something that's out of the ordinary. Like, what is the best way to take that money and like stretch it out, maximize it? Like, is there a specific way to invest so that you can not just like lose it all next month by buying a new car or something like that? Like, what would be the smartest way to use a big lump sum of cash like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I'm going to answer that kind of a couple ways here. So number one, I'm going to speak, probably one thing the viewers should know is like everyone's situation is a little bit different. And what I do in my business a lot of is customizing things to each person's individual situation. Mm-hmm. Now that being said, to answer your question, I can kind of speak in generalities mm-hmm. as to what I would do, with a big lump sum of cash like that. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the first things I would look at is, am I running my own business now? Are we assuming that this person who gets the big lump sum of cash is an entrepreneur, mm-hmm. and is a land entrepreneur at that?
Probably land, or at least in the real estate space. Like okay. Either they're already totally living on their own, or based on their own income, or they're like months away from that. So they're getting ready to pull the plug, and they want to be smart about how they spend their money.
Okay. Yeah, so I can give you kind of general wealth management principles as to how they would want to think about that. So anytime you're in a business, like a land development business where you have more lumpy income, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be land. It could be like a salesman who works on commission, selling big pieces of equipment or anything like that. You would really kind of want to think of your human capital, the money you're making from your job, as pretty pretty risky, mm-hmm. right? Because you don't know if you're going to have that the next month. You might not have that the next month. Yeah. So that big lump sum you've just made, you probably want to be relatively conservative with. Mm-hmm. And the reason you want to be conservative with it is because you want to know that you'll have something there in case there's no big transaction next month. Mm-hmm. So if your human capital is fairly risky, then that money that you've made from that, your financial capital, you would want it to be a little bit more conservative to get you through those periods from that period of time until the next transaction you do.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I know there's sort of a common theme that I've noticed with a lot of people I've talked to who have gone through this process of moving from a job to full-time self-employment. And I mean, just one of the commonalities I've seen is like frugality, or at least the willingness to be frugal, like what you're saying, living on, what was it, how much per month?
I was living on about $20,000 to $25,000 per year.
Per year.
Yeah.
Right. So that translates to not a lot. And mm-hmm. granted, your situation is you're a single man, right?
Yes.
So like you don't have a wife to support you in the workplace or anything. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's kind of a downside. But you also don't have like kids to pay for. So I guess that's an upside. Mm-hmm. But I think no matter how you slice it, like in anybody's situation, like there are ways to be frugal and there are ways to kind of let loose and spend a lot more than you really need to. So if you are looking to make this kind of transition, like really, really look closely at your expenses and be willing to make sacrifices. And ultimately, I think it's like, what is your freedom worth? Mm-hmm. And how much do you hate your corporate life for being mm-hmm. stuck in your job? Because if it's really like prison to you, making little financial sacrifices could be like relatively small if it buys you your freedom. So
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you a couple stories. I could tell you multiple stories about that, but I'll just tell one.
Yeah, sure.
So when I was looking at starting my business, there were some hurdles that I had to get over to actually start the type of business I had, and one of them was that no brokerage house would let me on their platform to hold my clients' accounts, because I couldn't have you write a check and then I put that in my bank account. I have to have a bank that will hold it.
Sure.
And so I had to have a relationship with a bank, and a lot of them were saying hey, do you have $20 million, to put in the accounts to start? And I said no. And so next thing I started doing was I started looking for a partner. And as I started meeting with other people that worked in my industry, they would say, and they would name 6-figure incomes they were making, and they'd say, I can't leave this. And I was like, well, I guess you're really enjoying it. And they'd say, no, I hate it. My coworkers drive me nuts. My employer forces me to sell things to clients that I don't think I should be selling to them. It's really difficult. I don't like it. And I would say, well, don't you want to be free? And they'd say, yeah, but sometimes they would say my spouse will kill me if I do something like this, or sometimes they'll say I just have too many expenses. I can't do it. And so just to go back to what you were saying earlier, one of the things that you can't put a number amount on, if you're saying to yourself, and I run into this with a lot of people in my industry, if you're saying to yourself, I don't know if I'll end up making more money doing this, or if I'll make more money staying with your employer. If that's your attitude, then stay with your current employer. If your attitude is, I want to be an entrepreneur because I want to be free, that you'll be much, much happier going into entrepreneurship with that type of attitude.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, how people have this idea that their job is somehow secure, dependable, or they can rely on that, and it might be to some extent, but just from the standpoint of there is a set amount of income, like clockwork, that's gonna be there in most cases. But at the same time, you can get fired at any point for things that are not your fault. And I think I actually heard a story from Jim Carrey, of all people. He was doing a commencement speech, and he was talking about how his father could have been a big deal comedian. He was a hilarious person, but he took the safe route and worked a career in accounting for his whole life. And I can't recall the story. You could probably find it on YouTube, but sort of the direction his story went was that he got fired, lost a job, went through severe financial hardship, and the moral of the story was you can just as well fail at something you hate doing. So it's if failure is an option either way, you might as well fail at doing something you love, or at least take a risk at doing that. So just something to consider. I mean, obviously you got to be smart about it, and that's why we're talking about this, but if you're scared of leaving your 8 to 5 career, just consider that kind of thing. So.
Right, and if you like it, and if you like the safety, and you have nice coworkers, and there can be reasons to stay. In my case, I was somebody who really wanted freedom and really wanted to be my own boss.
Yeah.
And I was willing to. I didn't care whether I would make more, in corporate America than I would doing what I do now. I really wanted freedom.
Yeah, and that's not, it's not a huge thing for everybody. Some people do have a very good work life. It's not necessarily the thing that everybody has to do, but just kind of have to consider where you're at and what you want out of life, I guess. I know, being the financial advisor that you are, and just kind of knowing generally what people are supposed to do or what the good advice is there a certain ratio you're supposed to maintain? I know in the real estate business, one of the struggles is, especially in the land business, there's a very significant ongoing cost that has to be paid for marketing. If you want to keep the machine going, you have to keep funneling money into direct mail and for buying properties and that kind of thing. So all the money that you make, it's definitely not just have fun spending it all, because you have to make sure that some of that is going back into the business, or it's eventually going to grind to a halt. So with businesses like that, and I think every business is like that to some extent, is there some kind of ratio you're supposed to maintain where of all my income, this percentage needs to go back into the business, this percentage I can live off of?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, again, this kind of falls in the category of questions where, like, right, each situation is going to be somewhat unique. And so I would think of, kind of what a worst case scenario looks like. So I would say to myself, what is the longest, or what are the worst things I think could happen? And then I would plan for those in terms of the amount of money I would put in the bank. So if that is, I'm trying to think of a good real estate example of something terrible. I don't know if, like, what would be a good example of, like, something terrible happening in the real estate business that would be a huge expense?
Yeah, I mean, depending on which strategy you're talking about, like house flipping, there's a million different things that can go wrong. Contractors flaking out on you, buying the wrong property, underestimating the repairs, that kind of thing. If you're talking about the land business, I mean, you could buy a property and maybe misinterpret what the market value of it is, or maybe something takes longer to sell than you think, or it sells for less than you think. So just kind of like, and ultimately, like, those kind of big question marks are always going to be there in business. Like, you just don't know the future. So those would be some examples, I guess.
Okay, so yeah, I'll give kind of a couple kind of broad general ideas. Obviously, the first very high level general idea is like the money that you've made so far that you've saved. You're going to want to be very conservative with that, and you're probably going to want to have, I mean, if you want to be really conservative, you're probably going to want to have, a year, maybe 2 years of savings of your, to pay your expenses, which hopefully are, low expenses, and then, additionally, to pay the operating expenses for your business. And so, and that's especially at the start. As time goes on, and you're in the business for a while, and you feel like you're better and better able to forecast and make these types of risk judgments you need to make, then you can bring that down over time. But I'd say in the early days, you want to be very conservative. And I mean, that might be, again, everybody's situation is different. And when I think of kind of my business and stuff like that, I'm just kind of generally a conservative person with my own money. I wanted to have, before I started my business, I wanted to have 2 years of operating expenses for the business and 2 years of living expenses saved. Yeah,
and that's, when I hear 2 years, I mean, even to me, that sounds like, man, that's like super conservative. But I mean, if you're one who wants any kind of certainty or comfort in that realm, I mean, that kind of does make sense. And I think it again kind of speaks to the importance of your ability and your willingness to live frugally. Because say if your projected annual expenses are like $50,000, well, now you got to save $100,000, and that's a huge amount of money. But if you could whittle that down to $25,000 a year, and then it's only $50,000 you got to save up. So, another thing to consider.
And yeah, and one more thing I'll just throw on there too is, as I was saying earlier too, like everyone's situation is unique. And one of the things that, if you want to be a great entrepreneur that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to become a good judge of risk. If you don't judge as being a huge amount of risk in the transactions you're making or in the way you're running your real estate business, maybe you can lower that amount. But if you're really uncertain, I would be very conservative at the start.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Part of the dream behind self-employment is not just the freedom, but also hopefully we can like make more from self-employment than we could with our job. And along with that, like one of the reasons we'd want to make more is because then we can sort of like buy stuff just because it's fun rather than, because it's a need. Like I'm gonna starve to death if I don't have this much money. So when it comes to buying wants instead of needs, like say if I want to go out and buy a new BMW or something, in your opinion, how well do you need to have your needs covered before you can take that leap and start going crazy, just having fun and buying the things you really want in life?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I went through all that. I mean, I lived so frugally during my first year and a half of starting my business. It was like I started to grow accustomed to like a very conservative or thrifty lifestyle.
Yeah.
I think where I started to feel a little bit more comfortable was once I was making about double what my expenses were. So I was able to pay all the expenses for my business, then I was able to pay all of my living expenses, and then on top of that, I had, double what my living expenses were. And once I was there, I started to say, maybe I can go on a vacation this year, or, maybe I can buy a, plane ticket back home for Christmas, and start, doing things that were a little bit more, giving me a little bit more comfort. And I think that was really the biggest thing, was once I hit about double, then my living expenses, then all of a sudden I just started feeling much more comfortable, much more willing to, go out with friends, and so that was where it was for me. But each, everybody's also got to think about their own personal situation.
Is it nice to be able to buy name brand Cheerios instead of just like the generic?
Right, I was no longer buying like the Walmart brand, the Great Value brand products. I was now like, I'm going to get real.
That's when you've made it, is when you can actually get that name brand Cheerios bar.
It's funny you bring that up too, because when I would go to, where I live in the greater Chicagoland area, when I would go to barbecues and stuff like that, during that time period, I would buy like the Walmart brand, chips and salsa to bring to the party, and people would make fun of me for it. And I felt like I had made it, so to speak, once I, moved up to buying like Tostitos and, some like, homemade, more expensive like homemade brand salsa to the party.
Yeah, I can just see you buying like a bag of Doritos and then, walking away from the self-checkout lane in slow motion.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. There's a couple different mentalities behind funding your own living expenses and that kind of thing. One of them is focusing on your monthly cash flow, like how much dependable income is coming in every month. The other one is like how much cash do I have available in my bank account? So like if all the cash flow just stops for some reason, how much of a slush fund is there to survive off of? Do you have any opinions on that, like for your specific situation? I don't know if you want to share or not, but like, do you have a certain cash balance that you're never gonna dip below that? Or unless everything just goes horribly wrong, you never wanna dip below that.
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of, in my particular situation, I would say I try to keep about $15,000 in my checking account. And when you think back to like what I was saying earlier about like how much I spend per month, it's between like, I don't know, $1,500 to $2,000 a month. I'm putting away, a little over, 7 months of my expenses in my checking account that I have liquid, just in case I would ever need, I would have some sort of catastrophic health issue, or I would need money to help a family member or something like that. And so that's what I decided to do, and that's kind of the amount that I decided to go with. And that's worked fine for me.
Okay. And I know this question just came to my mind. Health insurance for many, and I know for me too, it was a big stumbling block, or just a big area of uncertainty when I was thinking about quitting my job. And I've heard this from many people, and it's why a lot of people choose to like stay shackled to their job, is just because they have this certainty blanket of health insurance being covered. And it is crazy how much, like I know since I have been self-employed, my health insurance costs have doubled every single year that I've done it, which has been, it's coming up on 3 years now. So hopefully it's not going to keep doubling. But what do you do for health insurance? Do you know of any alternative options out there, or just ways to deal with it?
I have another investment advisor who works with me, whose family specializes in insurance, and so him and I have had conversations about this, because I specialize in financial planning and wealth management, and he has a much stronger background in insurance. And so when I was trying to figure out what to do for my insurance, I called him up and said, what do you guys think is the best option? I would say in terms of health insurance, and in terms of health insurance, know that it is going to be really expensive no matter what. And I can give you some kind of general ideas of what I've done with my own personal insurance. You know, I would say one of the first things I did was I really kind of thought about, you know, what do I think my healthcare costs would be? You know, how much insurance do I think I need? And then second, I looked at, I did research to understand all of the different kind of features that go on a health insurance plan. And then at first I went out to the marketplace, but when, you know, the healthcare.gov, I went there first. Then when I talked to my friend, he said that was really, or the investment advisor that works with me, he was saying that really I didn't need that unless I was like registering for like, you know, special like low income insurance, and I could just go to like a private website of like a big company like, you know, Blue Cross or Aetna or something like that, and just buy it there. And so I figured out how much insurance I thought I needed, and then I bought it there. But the biggest thing people should know is it's really expensive. And when we looked into kind of the rules around getting a group plan, and so I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, it might be different from state to state, but if you're working on real estate and there's more than one of you, that you might want to look and see if you qualify for group status, which could help you get a little bit of a discount on your health insurance. But no, it's going to be expensive.
Yeah, interesting. Have you ever heard of like Medicare or any of these other like religious affiliated services that are like way cheaper, but also I think from what I've heard it's a little odd, like you can only go to certain doctors that may be a long way away? Or have you heard anything about that? Or
that is a great question, and I'm actually really curious about that now. I believe I have heard of something like that. I admit I have not done a whole lot of research on it, you know, because, you know, insurance isn't a huge part of my specialty. What I do tell people that they can look into if they're concerned about the cost of health insurance is if you get a higher deductible plan, and it qualifies under the government standards of a high deductible plan. One of the things you can do is you can open up an HSA account. And I would describe an HSA account as being kind of like an IRA account, like if you think of like your IRA account, which you might have rolled over your 401k into or something like that. It's kind of like an IRA account on steroids, because you put in pre-tax dollars, the money compounds free of taxes, and then it comes out tax-free too. And that can be something to kind of help you offset to help you get a less expensive insurance plan, and then, you know, have a way to spend pre-tax dollars on your insurance.
Yeah, that's exactly what my family's been doing, at least this year, and it's been working pretty well. It's I think as of 2018, the max that you can put in there tax-free is like $6,900 a year, I think. Don't quote me on that, but so yeah, I mean it's still a huge chunk of change. Like it doesn't mitigate the fact that it's still expensive, but you know, you can at least, you know, save on some taxes, and it's better than just, you know, losing your after-tax dollars for the same thing. What are your thoughts on debt? Like, how comfortable are you with debt? Do you have any, I don't know, personal beliefs or just like business practices? Like, is debt okay? Does it depend on what the debt is for? Is there such thing as good and bad debt, in your opinion?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's absolutely good and bad debt. I mean, as I meet with people, you know, I met with somebody and I felt like they were practically meeting with a loan shark, right? I said, what's the interest rate on the debt? And he said, 49%.
What?
And I was just like, oh my gosh. I said, just get out of there, you know.
Is that even illegal?
You know, and so, you know, there absolutely is good debt. In my mind, there's absolutely good debt and bad debt. You know, I would describe myself as a fairly conservative person. Again, I don't have any debt right now personally or with my business. And the reason for that is, you know, and that's, you know, not necessarily a rule for everybody, because real estate is a more capital intensive business where you might need debt. And debt might be very valuable to the work you're doing and the value you can add. And so in my mind, I look at debt as something that can either be useful, like a useful tool, or it can be, something that can be really challenging and something that can really make life a lot harder for you. And so, one of the first things I would do is I would think about the type of debt that I'm incurring, right? So something, for example, like, if I'm running up big bills on my credit card and not paying, just paying the minimum balance, right? That debt, might have a really high interest rate on it. If the debt is like a mortgage on, on the home I'm living in, or, say student loan debt or something like that, that is, debt that kind of is more common and tends to have, much better terms on it.
Okay. So don't use credit cards to buy a truckload of toilet paper.
Oh yeah, I would absolutely say don't use that, and pay off your credit card bill too. Sure. Each month.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure. Now I'm curious. I think you've sort of answered the question already, but it sounds like you consider yourself to be a financially conservative person. How do you feel about like risk? I don't know, do you like to go out on a limb, like if you're going to expand your business, or I don't know, buy an office building or invest in something? Like, do you sort of live on the wild side, or do you need like 100% certainty before you'll move on something like that?
The simple answer is, do you like risk? Well, some. I mean, you're pretty much taking risk by getting out of bed each morning, right? That's the really kind of simple answer to it. And so I would say the more complicated answer I would give is that, really I try to always measure my risks and saying, okay, how much risk am I really taking here? And, then once I have established that, then I try to either eliminate or mitigate that risk, or just completely avoid it. The one thing that I would encourage people not to do is to blindly take risks. Really try to understand what you're getting into. If you're, whether you're investing money, buying a ETF or a mutual fund or a stock or a bond, or whether you're buying a piece of real estate, really try to learn about what you're doing and understand what's going on, understand what's gonna, drive the value to what you're hoping to get out of it. And so, like, to kind of provide an example, many times when I meet with younger people, they tell me they say, oh, put me in the riskiest portfolio as possible. I want to, retire sooner. I want a lot of money, something like that. And so their willingness to take risk is really high. But then as I start asking them other questions, like, okay, what's your income? Do you think your job is pretty stable? How much money do you have saved in your bank account? The thing we start to see is their ability to take risk is much lower, and that they shouldn't have such a high, willingness to take risk, because they've got kind of a handful of other things going on in their financial lives that would make that a bad idea. So really try to understand the risks of what you're doing, whatever that is that you're doing, and then try to eliminate or mitigate those. And then if you can't, avoid it, move on to the next thing.
Sure.
Maybe one more thing I'll add on top of that too is that when you do feel like you're taking bigger risks, the other thing you want to make sure is that you're compensated appropriately for taking a big risk. So, I guess what I would say for that is, like, if you think the transaction you're getting into is more risky, a land transaction, or if you're, buying stocks or whatever, you want to be able to say to yourself, well, the reason that I'm entering this more risky transaction is because I feel like there is a bigger return that's possible. And you really need to ask yourself, is that bigger return that I think is there, is that even realistic or not?
So, Chris, I know you were kind enough to sort of think through this a little bit before we sat down and had this conversation, but you kind of came up with like ways that people can evaluate their situation if they're looking at transitioning to self-employment. Like, what should they be thinking about? And what kinds of factors really matter when they start making this decision? What are some of the things that people should keep in mind as they're considering taking this leap?
Okay, yeah, when I think about what they should keep in mind, I mean, the thing I'll throw out there first is, with each person's situation being unique, one of the first things they should probably think about is, if they have a financial advisor, talk to that person who intimately knows their situation. If they want some kind of general things to think about, one of the first big ones I would say is, what is going on with your income situation if you want to start your business. And with me being by myself, being unmarried and having no children right now, I really had to think about, okay, how am I going to support myself through this period of time where I don't know if this is going to work or not. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to set up this kind of business or if I'm going to hit a roadblock. So possibility one is that you continue working your day job, and that way you're able to collect an income, and then you work on your business in your spare time. And am I correct in saying that's kind of what you did initially?
Yep. And I will say, it was frustrating, and it took years, really. I mean, years and years and years for it to finally come to fruition. And there were times when I felt like, man, is this ever gonna work? Why is this taking so long? But man, I gotta tell you, I never had these panic attacks in the night when I was like, oh my word, what are we gonna do? We don't have money. It wasn't a thing. And I heard a quote one time, I can't remember who said it, but it said, monotony is the awful reward of the careful. So it's it's great to be careful, and there are definitely benefits to be had from that, but at the same time, it makes for a monotonous existence for a while until you get to the point where you can have adventures and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and then, I'd say the second option is if you are married, maybe you have a spouse who has a good income. And maybe when you look at your expenses and you say to yourself, well, if we cut back a little bit, we could live off just, my spouse's income. And so that can be a good setup too, because then you could leave your job, you could start working on your, your entrepreneurship opportunity. And the other thing I'll throw in there too that I've seen being as an entrepreneur, and I don't know if you've seen this too, but make sure to get your spouse on board with your plans of being an entrepreneur. I have seen that lead to catastrophe on more than one occasion. And so definitely get your spouse on board and make sure they're ready to be in it for the long haul. And so sometimes spouses don't like all the risk involved in being an entrepreneur. But if your spouse is working, right, obviously, and your expenses are less than that spouse's pay, you can start your business and feel like you have a certain degree of comfort. And then the third option, which is the one I did when I started mine, is you quit your job, you're unmarried, and you basically start your business with nothing more than your savings. And one of the things I noticed that you said earlier that kind of resonated with me was I wasn't laying in bed at night being really anxious. Like for me, having quit my job, in one sense I had a lot more time to work on my business to devote to it, but I was extremely anxious. I was anxious because I kept wondering, is this actually going to work? Am I going to be able to find clients for my business? And then the second thing that came up too, which added to my anxiety, was that a number of friends around me, some friends around me were very supportive, and they said they'd become my first clients if I was able to set up the business. Other friends were like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? They were like, go back downtown and just get another job. This is silly to think you could start your own business at a fairly young age. And so know that there are going to be people around you who are supportive of you, and know that there are also going to be people around you who think you're silly for doing something like this. And it will, if you're anything like me, it will give you some anxiety.
Remind me, how old were you when you went out on your own?
32.
Okay. I think I was 32 as well. So, cool. And has your business, having the time to devote, all day, every day, basically, to growing your business now, has it sort of gone, up fast, or has it been a very slow rise, or where are you at right now?
The way I would describe it is I would say it was like a snowball that started out, probably pea size, and it just started building. And so when I started my business, one of the drawbacks I think to doing it the way I did it was there just wasn't enough work. There were just so many things I had to figure out. There wasn't really like a full day's work every day when I started. So I started realizing, I can only like stand to work on this for half a day because, it makes me anxious and like I need to get my mind off of it. And like I have so many big decisions to make here. And there are so many things I'm understanding, trying to figure out that I need to spend my other half of the day doing something else. And so at that time, I was working through a program to get a credential that I thought would be helpful to me. And so I was studying for a test, and I was involved in some volunteering type things, basically kind of volunteering type service activities with nonprofits. And so that's kind of how I passed the other part of the time. But when I started out, I was really only working probably half a day each day. And then what happened is it started, it was like this snowball at the top of the hill. And, it was building momentum. And now for me, I'm about 3.5 years in, which I guess is pretty close to the same as you. And, it's just been building, and it gets busier and busier. And now I have another investment advisor working with me, and I have a part-time employee supporting me who I'm probably going to bring on full-time at the end of the year. And so it's been a very exciting time, but things are starting to get busier and busier as it builds momentum.
Yeah, that's interesting. You were talking earlier about, people who are not necessarily encouraging about the idea of, going to work for yourself. Like, just go get a job. Like, that's cute that you think you can do this, but come on, be realistic. There's sort of like a couple different categories of people out there who consider this kind of thing. Some people think like way too big, way too fast, like they're frankly too ambitious and they don't think it through. Other people are the opposite, and I would put myself in this category where like they don't think big enough. They're way too hesitant. They're scared. They get anxiety about every little thing. Would you say you're like that too?
Yes, I would put myself in that category. Yeah. When I started my business, people would ask me, "What is your goal?" I would tell them, really, if I can just pay my living expenses and have a little bit left over, I could be happy with my life and not grow not grow anymore, and just be a good family member and be a good friend and enjoy hobbies that I have, those types of things. I was not thinking big at all. And I remember one guy, one other entrepreneur I was around who said, "That sounds so boring. How could you be an entrepreneur with goals like that?" And for me, my goal was my goal was very different than his. My goal was around freedom.
Yeah, I know. It's an amazing thing to have autonomy and decide what you get to work on every day. And frankly, like, just to love the work. Like, if I've said this to other people sometimes, like, if I wasn't married, if I did not have kids, like, I would probably work like all the time, like all day, every day. Because like that's what I consider fun. Like that's what I want to do, and it's an amazing thing to get to do that. So, I guess to me it's tragic to see people who like clearly don't like what they're doing, and but they're also like too scared to think that they can do their own thing. So they just kind of like voluntarily stay in this prison of sorts. And I'm not saying it's a prison for everybody. Some people don't think of their jobs like that by any means, but for those who do, but they're also unwilling to take the risks and, go out on a limb, like, it's just tragic, like it's not the way life was meant to be lived, I don't think. So, but anyway, this has been really, really enlightening, Chris, to talk about this kind of thing. Just given your experience and not only firsthand being self-employed, but also just knowing, the business and the financial aspects of how this all works. If people want to learn more about you or talk to you about this kind of thing, is there a way to get a hold of you or a website they should check out? Or
Yeah. So my website for my wealth management and financial planning business is www.cjwcapital.com.
Okay.
So it's www.cjwcapital.com.
Okay.
And my email address is chris@cjwcapital.com. That's the normal spelling of Chris, CHRIS. You could also find me on LinkedIn too. And I guess you can my last name is kind of hard to...
Yeah. Did I even say your last name? Chris Wiesehan.
So yeah, good luck finding that on LinkedIn, but you probably want to go to the website first, or see if he puts it on the video tag.
I will, chances are if you're watching this, you've already seen it, but I'll put the little spelling of his name in the video. I'll also put it beneath this video. I'll also link to everything he just talked about. But yeah, appreciate it, Chris. If you guys have more questions about this kind of thing, or if you just want to pick his brain about it, feel free to get a hold of him and we can talk to you more. So thanks for watching. Appreciate your time, and talk to you next time.